can't believe what I am looking at. They have called this the Rosetta Stone, but it is from Egypt, and it was never ever called Rosetta. Never. The British stole everything. They stole everything. And I'm here to collect it. Maybe I can arrange for someone to pick it up. We take it back to Egypt. Rosetta was never ever called Rosetta.
Imagine this. Someone breaks into your home, steals your most prized possessions, then charges the world to come and see them on display. And when you ask for them back, they offer to loan them to you for a limited time. Well, that's exactly what Britain's museums have done for over a century. From Benin's bronze masterpieces to the royal gold of the Asante Kingdom, sacred treasures were looted during empire and turned into profit. Today, the British Museum earns over £40 million a year, while UK museums collectively generate nearly £900 million annually, and much of it has been built on stolen African heritage. Now, see, they call it restitution, but real restitution isn't alone. It's an acknowledgement of theft and billions in reparations to claim the wealth colonial powers have enjoyed for generations. You know, these artifacts aren't souvenirs, they're evidence of what was taken. And justice means giving them and their value back to the people who made them. And if you didn't know, now you know.
From Africa and across the ocean, I welcome you to my YouTube space. I am the Kenyan Beast, and of course, we are doing it the African way every day, every time. Now, when I talk about African way, Africa is rising. African youths are rising. African children are rising. You can see, you can feel it in the air. It is happening all over. Now, one thing I know for sure, when the children finally stand up and ask for what was stolen, then the thief start shaking. And today, Europe is the one that is trembling. Europe is shaking. Europe is cracking. Why? Because the children of Africa are asking questions. Africans youths are asking questions. Africans mothers and fathers are asking questions. And yeah, it's a new rise that we are seeing. They were not ready for this. Okay, so today I'm diving into a truth that Europe hoped will never come to light, a truth that was buried, a truth that was disguised with museums, borders, propaganda, and fake superiority. And this truth is now here. Africa is rising, and Europe is breaking down politically, morally, spiritually, and as Africans begin to reclaim their heritage or their artifacts, their memory and their identity, the Europe is going down. So this is not just about stolen artifacts, it's about stolen power. Because when I talk about artifacts, for example, it again can be symbolic. We talk about power, we talk about stolen culture, we talk about stolen dignity, we talk about stolen culture. I've said it. Okay, now the return of those is causing the shockwave. Before I continue, I want you to watch these clips here, and then we come back with more commentary, as I always do.
Nigeria urgently calls for the return of artifacts held in the UK, especially now that there are reports of a senior curator who stole more than 2,000 artifacts from the British Museum. Nigerian officials have also expressed disappointment that items worth millions are being sold cheap on eBay. This is seen as disrespectful to the true owners of the artifacts. Both Nigerian and Greek officials are currently demanding the return of thousands of stolen items, including over 900 Benin bronze pieces and the Parthenon marbles, due to concerns about the British Museum's security. The artifacts were taken from Benin City by British forces, and now there are renewed calls for repatriation. Over the years, there have been calls for the return of these bronze pieces, but many of them are still in the museum. Nigerian officials, including Abba Issa Tijani and Hanatu Musawa, are pushing for the immediate return of these Benin bronzes.
Huge news in the world of cultural heritage and archaeology. The Netherlands is returning 119 Benin bronzes to Nigeria. So these incredible pieces were looted by British forces during the brutal 1897 invasion.
Wow. It turns out some colonizers have shame. Most of them don't, but some do. So this is good. all that is left with is you pay us the money you got from these artifacts with interest, and then because we have souls and we don't want revenge, personally I do, but we would take your capital, the capital of Holland, as reparations. You get me? Yeah. And also I have a question for the rest of the Western Europeans. Do you have shame? Because if I stole something from somebody and he knows it's in my house and he asks me to return it, I'll be ashamed, bro. I'll be like, dang, with my tails between my legs, and be like, oh, I'll take it. You get me? But these colonizers will justify this shit, bro. Zero shame whatsoever. But yeah.
Till today, 2025, well over 100 years later, our history is complicated, right? You know, not only our history as Black people, as Nigerians, but each and every one of those narratives is about us being taken from. 1897, the British called it the punitive expedition of 1897. And they just raped, pillaged, took the stuff. It's in the British Museum now. And they literally have a plaque saying plundered from the Benin Kingdom. It's not even like denied. It's just like right there. And then they instituted the 1963 British Museum Act that meant you can't, literally, as all these countries were getting independence, they're like, oh, quick, let's put in a law that makes sure they can't take their stuff back.
Yeah.
Till today, 2025, you know, well over 100 years later, they're still hiding behind, like, what? Like, if we stole the crown jewels and they were in a museum in Lagos, now, can you imagine, you know, that what the equivalent would be the other way around?
Hi, I'm Abere, and I am an African art historian, curator, cultural researcher, anthropologist. My work is all around the preservation of African culture and heritage.
So there's a part of colonial history that includes the removal of African arts. These African arts were removed and taken to the West. You see, if we keep it 100, removal is really a fancy way to put it because they were basically stolen.
I work currently for an African diaspora organization based in London but does work all over Africa and the Caribbean called AFFORD, which is the African Foundation for Development.
Well, in recent years, there have been the growing awareness of the need to repatriate these artworks back to their countries of origin.
We are working on the restitution of African objects and artifacts in Western museums, but also strengthening the African heritage sector, museums, tourism industry back in Africa. So currently we're working in Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, at the moment.
I linked up with my friend Abere to talk about African arts.
Most of my work is around our culture, African culture and heritage, pre-colonial, the classical Africa, and trying to understand who we were before colonialism. Why is it important? You know that old saying, you don't know who you are or where you're going until you know where you're coming from? Basically, the concept of Sankofa, which is the Akan proverb, which is depicted by the bird picking the egg from the back, or the two swans that are like that. And this idea, again, you have to go back to collect, retrieve from the past in order to go forward into the future. And I think it's important because our case is quite unique. Colonialism and imperialism stripped us of our identity, our spirit, and that was the first thing that was broken, was targeted when the imperialists came and wanted to not just take the resources, but also control the people, which is obviously colonialism. And we have to get that back. I think currently we are following somebody else's ideology and vision of life, culture, and it's not really working for us. Why is culture important? What's that going to do for the development of Africa? What's getting a Benin bronze or bronzes from Iboku or from the lower Niger Delta region going to do for the child who can't eat right now? And it's a very fair argument. And I think the way I'd answer that would be the issue has to be tackled from a number of different angles. I don't think there's one solution for the development challenges that we're facing. It can't be one approach. It can't just be an economic approach, because the economic approach will just mean that, okay, yeah, we're going to get money and then, yeah, like, yeah, we've got money now, but then there's no substance, and then it's like who
Loaning back stolen artifacts instead of just giving them back? That's what the UK is doing with these cultural artifacts. They were taken by British troops during colonial times from Ghana's Asante Royal Court. 32 items will be returned under a 3-year loan agreement, with the option to extend for a further 3 years. The Victoria and Albert Museum is lending 17 objects, and the British Museum 15. Both are in London. Some of the pieces are part of the Asante Royal Regalia and are of great historical and spiritual importance to Ghana. The loan agreements were not made with Ghana's government, however, but with the current Asante king, known as Asante Hene. For the first time after 150 years, many of the gold artifacts will be shown in Ghana. The objects will be displayed in the Manshia Palace Museum in Kumasi, the capital of the former Asante Kingdom. But why just lend them back? Some national museums in the UK are banned by law from permanently returning contested items. The British government has released guidance advising cultural institutions that are holding contested assets to keep them and explain the historical background. But in recent years, calls for stolen items to be returned are growing. What do you think? Should the UK change the law and give away ownership instead of loaning?
I think when we demand what was stolen from Africa, we call them artifacts. Sure, some were artifacts, but not all of it were artifacts. A lot of what the white people stole from us is our spiritual heritage that they use now to govern us. They wanted the golden stool so desperately they were prepared to go to war for it because they knew the power of the golden stool. So I think for the next 3 days, as we continue to explain and define what reparations are for us, we should remember that when we come to material reparations, which are the physical things that were taken from a continent, we should remember that our national altars, as we sit here, still lie in Europe, except for Eswatini, for they never captured their national altars. That's why they are the only country amongst us which still keeps the Queen.
Finland just returned sacred stones to Namibia, who were the rightful owners anyways. It was stolen from them. The stones were actually taken from Ondonga, a traditional kingdom of the Ovambo people in what is today northern Namibia. The stones were handed over by Finnish Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs Jukka Salavora to Namibia's Education, Arts and Culture Minister Anna. The sacred stones were taken away from Namibia during the colonial era, and the sacred stones meant a lot to the community, so they were happy to get them back.
Who do they belong to? They belong to the museums where they are now.
Now, that's what you call colonial thinking. The very idea that you own what you looted because you looted it.
It was looting, yes, but there were laws. The looting of war was legal.
So had we looted your sacred objects back then and were holding them now in Africa, you think we should keep them, no matter how integral they are to your cultural identity?
These works of art, when they were taken, if they were not taken, they would have disappeared, because many of artifacts, African artifacts, are made of wood, and wood it was not made to be kept, you know, so it would have disappeared. They became works of art in museums because Europeans said it's art.
This is paternalistic arrogance at best. The question isn't whether they would have survived. The question is why you think you had the right to decide for us. Had you asked us if we'd like you to try and preserve them on our behalf, that would have been a different story. But you killed, enslaved, impoverished, and now gloat about your supposed superiority. If our art is so primitive, why are you hoarding hundreds of thousands of examples? Give it back.
Yes, it's okay to send them to Africa, but they must return to the French museums where they belong.
No. They belong to the Benin, Dahomey, and Ashanti kingdoms, the ancestors of present-day Nigeria, Benin, and Ghana, their rightful owners today.
Where do Africa's treasures belong?
They belong to the museums where they are now.
Now imagine this headline differently. Imagine if it said, "Where do Germany's treasures belong?"
For centuries, Africa has endured the heartbreaking loss of its invaluable artifacts, stripped away by colonial powers and collectors driven by greed. These stolen treasures, imbued with immense cultural and spiritual significance, represent the very essence of African heritage. Their removal from their rightful homes stands as a haunting testament to the deep injustice inflicted upon African communities.
These museums have locked up the precious legacy of 1 million people, and they reject all demands to return any of it. So by holding on to them and displaying them for a fee, Western museums are still benefiting from their colonial legacy, still validating their historical wrongs and injustices.
I love the Benin bronzes. I think that they properly reside in the British Museum.
Their empires have crumbled, but their sense of entitlement.
And I saw yesterday the Ghanaian government receiving 31 artifacts that were stolen during the British Empire's reign, and they've returned them back now to Ghana. Is it good enough just to return our artifacts? What did you do with them? The amount of millions you collected when people are coming to see these things. Who accounts for all that? Now it's good enough just to bring the pictures back and here you are, here are things. You're dealing with thieves here. You're dealing with criminals here. You're dealing with murderers. Look at Kenya. No one so far has even come back from the British government to speak about the massacre of the Maasai during the Mau Mau War. And who gets accountable? And you want to talk about living together? Living together in harmony without being accountable.
And when they say we have no art, they forget that they have stolen all of them and they are to be found in the museums in Europe. If we had no culture and if we could not do the thing they say we could not do, why were they plundering the things that they plundered? Why? Because we had a culture, and what you do is that you destroy a people's culture and then you create another culture and make them think like you want them to think. This is what they did, not only to us who remained in the mother continent, they did it even to our brothers and sisters who are taken to the Caribbean, those who are taken to the Northern America, those who went to Southern America. They did it and they took away our language. And if you doubt me, I want you to watch Alex Haley's Roots and see how the main character, Kunta Kinte, was beaten that he may abandon his name and acquire a new culture. But those who have a culture and those who believe in it will never abandon it.
Welcome back. Now, Europe is not collapsing because Africa is angry. Europe is not collapsing because Africa has a lot of military. Europe is collapsing because Africa is finally waking up. Okay? For centuries, Europe used 3 things to control Africa. That is narrative, artifacts, and culture. And it used philosophy or psychology, to be precise. They stole our gold, but they also stole our story. And here is the part that they never realized or they never wanted us to know as Africans or black people, that a people who do not control their history cannot control their future. So many African scholars have said this for decades, have said it before. Okay? For example, Professor Anta Diop, Sheikh, he warned that Africa's decline began the day African history was put on European hands. And right now, that thing is happening, or the opposite is happening. Africa is taking her story back. We are taking our story back, and that's why you are seeing a lot of African content creators are on this platform. Some of them are talking about Africa, some of them are talking about Caribbean, some of them are talking about Black America. So, for example, if you tell me I don't talk about Africa, just know that we will not all talk about Africa. Some people will talk about the artifacts, the resources of Africa, the puppetry in Africa. They will talk about the colonization in Africa. And some will talk about the unity of black people, Africans, black people all over the world. Others will talk about the Caribbean. Others will talk about the forgotten history of black people. So if you combine us together, we get a full reclamation of black people across the world. We get the full control of our story. Because I cannot be talking about Africa, he talk about Africa, he talk about Africa. But we can all talk about black people in different angles. I know you understand me. So when you see I don't talk about Africa, that's just know there's a channel somewhere, a black person, an African talking about Africa, talking about Kenya, talking about politics. So when we combine our story, that's where Africa Rising is coming from. Uniting black people, knowing about your story, talking about Africa, and etc., etc. So it is happening right now. We are creating our own story, not creating. We are representing our own story. We are writing our own story firsthand. Firsthand. Okay? Now, those artifacts that were stolen from Africa, it wasn't decoration. That was power. Now, let me break this down into clarity. Because when Europe stole artifacts from Africa, they didn't take souvenirs. For example, here, I have a souvenir from South Sudan. I was in South Sudan, and this is a souvenir from South Sudan. But they didn't take it as souvenir, one like this. No. They took symbols of authority. For example, I go into South Sudan, instead of taking this money as a souvenir, I go and make their president a puppet. I go and take their symbols of authority, their spiritual items, their historical evidence, their royal objects, their sacred documents and political legitimacy. Okay? In the Europe museums, they call them objects of study, but in reality, they were objects of control. Europe understood something very deep, that if we hold their past, if we hold Africans and black people past identity, and if we hold, they will look at us for validation. They will ask us, who was my father? Who was my king? That's what we are doing, and we are doing as Africans. We were asking white people about our story. We were asking Europe about our past. Because we didn't wrote it ourselves. They wrote it for us. And that was a game. That was a psychological operation disguised as anthropology. But the moment Africans started asking for their artifacts back, Europe panicked. You have seen the videos. Africans have realized, yo, this is from Egypt. This is from Ghana. This is for... Now we are realizing it is in their museums. We are waking up. And Europe has the fear that never expected. Okay? Europe is not afraid of giving things back. No. Europe is afraid of what those returns symbolize. Because they know once Africa reclaims her artifacts, that means what? That means Africa reclaims her memory, Africa reclaims civilization, reclaims authority, pride, and her continuity. And the lie, the big lie, is that Europe is superior than Africa. Okay? Now, as historian Dr. Obenga said in a lecture years ago, he said that, I'll quote, that Europe fears the return of Africans' certainty. That's the fear. Not the artifacts themselves, but the certainty that comes with knowing who you are. Africa's rising requires a psychological revolution. This is not political. It is psychological, because for centuries, Europeans convinced Africans that your kingdoms were primitive. They convinced us that our goals were inferior. They convinced us that our gods, our culture, our traditionals, all of those were useless. They convinced us that civilization came from Europe. But now the artifacts speak for themselves. Why? Because Africa thrones over 600 years old. Mathematics tools older than Greeks, engineers older than Rome, architecture older than anything else in Europe. So the truth destroys the lie. And that is why Europe is shaking. And the reason why European museums are terrified is because the biggest museum in Europe, for example, it's called what? The Louvre, the Louvre, okay? I think we have different pronunciation. The Louvre, the Louvre. Now, that is the British Museum. Now, the biggest museum in Europe, for example, the British Museum, they fear the day Africa asks for everything back. Not because they can't return them, but because returning artifacts exposes how Europe became rich. Returning artifacts exposes that Europe's wealth is not European genius, but it is stolen from Africa. Gold, Africa. Ivory, Africa. Artifacts, Africa. Knowledge, Africa. Land, labor, all of them. So once Africa reclaims what is hers, the entire European story collapses like a house of cards. And that's why they keep delaying the returns. That's why they talk in circles. That's why they say that we need research. That's why they say we need dialogue, that we need legal frameworks. It's all fear. Okay? It's all fear. So one of Europe's greatest nightmare is happening right now. How? Black Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, and Africans are uniting. And once you unite, the African on the continent with the African in the diaspora, once we unite, it's over. Because now the artifacts are not just African history, they become Black global history. Because now that the artifacts are not just African history, we are starting to realize something. I've just talked about Black global history. Okay? And unity destroys the colonial mindset, the colonial narrative. And this is the moment Europe hoped will never come. This is bigger than museum. You know, when people know where they come from, when people know what they build of, when people know where what they accomplished, or what their ancestors created, then they walk differently. They become bold. They become different. They speak different. They lead differently. When you know your identity, your psychology changes. When you know your identity, your confidence changes, your destiny changes. And that's what Europe fear. And that's why I always tell my Black Americans brothers and Caribbean sisters and brothers, let's embrace our identity. Let's embrace African identity. Let's do that. Let's do that. A confident Black man is very much unstoppable. Okay? Now, while Africa is rising, Europe is falling. Collapsing economies. We have aging population. We have rising nationalism. We have social tension, immigration crisis, you know. It is like a house built on stolen stones. And now the stones are being taken away. The owner of the stones have come. So where will your house? It will not be stable. The utensils will fall. The chairs will fall there. Understood? So Africa Rise is a cultural, is spiritual, is political, and it's economic. It's cultural because Africans are rediscovering who they are. It is economic because Africa is negotiating now from strength, not from weakness. It is spiritual because Africans are reconnecting to ancestral philosophies suppressed by colonialism. So this is the new Africa. We are not begging, not apologizing, not explaining, but reclaiming. Great Africans like Auntie Diop, John Clark's, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Amos Wilson, they all warned about this, that the day Africa remembers herself, the world will change. And that's the day is here, and it's happening every day, every time. And the Europe's time is running out. France losing influence in West Africa, Britain losing global respect, Germany begging for partnership, museums facing lawsuit, young Africa rising everywhere, diaspora returning home. So it is not just random, it is a shift. And whether Europe likes it or not, the return of Africa artifacts is a symbol of that shift. Okay? Now, this means a lot to the future of Black people worldwide. Now, this is the part I want you to feel it deeply. As Africa rises, Black people everywhere rise. That is the reality. I want you to know that. Because the world treats Black people based on image, or the world treats someone based on image of their homeland. Okay, so if Africa is seen as weak, then black people are treated as weak. But if Africa is seen as strong, then black people walk with strength. And the return of artifacts is not just African empowerment, it is black global empowerment. And it terrifies the world. Tell me what you think on the comment section about this video. Because I think the return of artifacts is the return of power. For example, when Benin artifacts return, it's not just a bronze, it is royalty. When Nubian artifacts return, it's not just pottery, it is empire. When Ethiopian artifacts return, it is not just manuscript, it is civilization. So Africa is not reclaiming objects, Africa is reclaiming her soul. And Europe knows exactly what that means. Now, I always say after every video, some of the things that we can do, because we can have problems and we have solutions. Because, for example, the way forward for Africa right now, for Africans, Gen and everyone, because the rising is not just automatic, it requires action. Okay, we require action for us, Africa, to rise to greater heights. Number one, we need to demand full reparation of artifacts. Every African nation must demand everything back. Number two, we must build museums and archives. We must teach African history properly. We must unite with diaspora. We must build economic power. That's what we need to do. Reject European moral authority, strengthen Pan-African identity, build youth leadership, and use media to shift the narrative. That's the only way we can do. Channels like Kenyan Beast, Neo Africa. This is the battlefield, and this is where the war of identity is won. Okay? We are living in historic times right now. Europe is breaking down not because Africa is fighting, but because Africa is finally standing. Reclaiming artifacts is reclaiming memory, pride, identity, legacy, and destiny. And once people reclaim their past, they determine their future. Africa is rising, black people are rising. Let's rise. Until next episode, peace out.